Most business owners don't change because they want to. They change because something forces them to. For Debbie Porter, that moment came when COVID stripped her business right back and exposed what was really holding it together and what wasn't.
What I loved about this conversation is how real it is. Debbie shares what happens when you stop guessing, stop relying on gut feel, and start building a business driven by numbers. This isn't about surviving a crisis, it's about growing into a business owner who understands their business well enough to lead it forward. It's about margins, profit, and understanding where your risks and opportunities lie. It's really what every business owner needs to know. Hi, Debbie. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
We're really excited to have this conversation, and let's dive straight in. What was happening in your business or your life that led you to the What One Thing?
I guess I started out, this business that I'm running now is 5.5 years old. It was born out of the embers of COVID, but I've been working for myself on a self-employment journey for 20 years. And that was because I started to raise a family. So I left my corporate life in order to raise 2 children. And I couldn't see how my corporate life and self-employment could, they're both time draining and energy draining endeavours. So I couldn't see how I could fit both into my life. And so that journey has been quite a long one, but also quite slow at the start because I was fitting what I could do around the needs of my children. And so you get trial and error. That's what led to my one thing, which is know your numbers, because you find out over time what not knowing them feels like. And that leaves you a little bit blindsided at times.
And can we dig into that? When you say blindsided, I think we've all been there as business owners. Was there a specific time or something that happened that made you think, wow, this has got to change?
When I started Destination Digital Marketing, I decided to go best practice with everything. So the 14, 15 years prior, I took all of the learnings, all the balls you drop, the things that you try and wing it on, and I decided to not do that with this business. I needed to do best practice all the way. So I'm a digital marketer, and one of the first best practice things I did was do all the digital marketing exactly as you should do it, as we advise our clients. And, it felt mitigating to then see that actual success because I had no brand. 5.5 years ago, I had no brand. I didn't even have a brand name. I didn't have an email address or website. I had to build everything from scratch. And it's very gratifying to see that applying best practice actually works. And you can then use that as a case study for your clients. But I also applied that to setting up the company properly. So I've been VAT registered from day one, registered at Companies House straight away, used my accountant to do all of that heavy lifting because I realised the things that have to be filed at Companies House and so on, it's quite complicated. That's where you should get someone in who does that as their day job, and you shouldn't be trying to wing it yourself. And so then, from having no income, no expenditure, going straight in, I then decided to intimately become acquainted with my numbers. So what am I spending money on? What is coming in to fund that? And I do all my own bookkeeping, so that's helped me feel like I'm at the beating heart of my business, which is what's going to keep you in business at the end of the day.
I really love that, Debbie. I think I talk about sometimes being my best client, and it's the same principle, isn't it? Which we sometimes, when we start our own business journeys, you always put your clients first, and almost your business sometimes becomes an afterthought or things get done as and when you can fit them in, rather than them being, actually, we should be setting the example. Well, it's music to my ears, everything that you've said, because it's like so many business owners, well, I'm sure that you do speak to business owners all the time. I know that. And they often get things muddled and upside down. Going back just a little bit then before you started Destination Digital, how did you go about doing your numbers then? Were you a little bit more relaxed about it?
Well, I guess when I got my first contract back in 2006, it wasn't for a very large amount of money. And it was like, well, okay, I'll just crack on and deliver this. But I didn't keep an eye on how much time I was using, and what resources I needed to deliver that contract. So, you need a computer, or you need to make sure that your broadband works well. So there's a lot of things that you have to purchase in order to deliver your very first contract. And then you've got this contract with this monetary value to it that you're not entirely sure what that value is. But now, coming to this date, when I work out my pricing, I know what my corporation tax liability on that income might look like. I know what my employees, PAYE staff liabilities on delivering that might look like, and I have a good sense of which of the clients I've got are providing good profit and which ones are sort of, probably breaking even or maybe even making a loss. So it's I guess it's like through trial and error when you realise, I wish I hadn't taken that on, actually. Being able to recognise that ahead of time is so much more useful, because we do reject inbound inquiries for work from time to time when your spidey senses go off and you think, no, I've been here before, we're not going to do that.
And that's a really great lesson, because that's actually quite hard to do sometimes in business, isn't it?
Yes, you want to chase the money. You need the money. You think that's going to look good in my bank account, but you have to also be able to have enough to step back and go, well, how much is it going to cost me to deliver on this? And sometimes is the personality fit, or are the expectations of that client commensurate with what I'm going to receive monetarily for that job? Yeah, absolutely. So you do have to have nerves of steel to say no to things. But yeah, I have learned that sometimes no is the best answer.
I think it's a real business maturity when you realise that you're basing your price based on your costs and what kind of margin you want to make and how much the business needs to make, rather than basing it on what the customer wants to pay, or alternatively on what competitors are charging. I presume, and I might be wrong, what was the big wake-up moment that made you realise, oh God, I'm taking jobs that are bringing a loss, or I really need to sort these costs out?
I suppose, without going too deeply into it, the COVID year was quite a wake-up call. At that time, I'd never been sacked so often, so quickly, by so many clients, because at the time we had hospitality clients, wedding clients. They just had to go to no business whatsoever overnight. So if you're taking those sorts of calls, where it's nothing to do with them, that the lockdown caused all of that and those rules at that time, but you're deleting lines out of your own spreadsheets, and then you're seeing what your own income looks like when you've got maybe an over-reliance on a certain type of sector, or you've got quite a large business weighting towards one type of client or another. So a lot of people do niche down, but COVID was a big old slap across the face that diversification is a really useful thing to do.
That's an incredible point, because as small businesses, we call them whales. We often have a whale that's, taking up 30% of our income, something like that. And we don't realise it. And we're just jamming in smaller, less profitable customers that we don't realise are less profitable at the time, because the whale is covering a lot of our costs. Is that what happened to yourself? And how did you dig into that? And how did you bounce back from that?
Well, I guess the business I now run, Destination Digital Marketing, was born from the embers. It's like what scraps can be figured out to proceed forwards from here. So what I use Xero. Xero's brilliant. I'm not sponsored by them, but it's great for all of those accounting things. It's fantastic for putting your income, your expenditure, as long as you do your bookkeeping correctly. Like I do all the bookkeeping rather than outsource it, because I can feel in touch with the numbers. And if I bookkeep correctly, I don't have to worry about my VAT return. I don't have to worry about payroll. I don't have to worry about corporation tax, like pulling off all the numbers for corporation tax for my accountant. But what Xero doesn't do is project for you. It only tells you what has already happened. And so I also keep a good old-fashioned spreadsheet, which is my sales ledger, and that projects forwards all our retainers. And so I can see in my financial year what my retainers that are due to come in, what they look like. And it's very easy using that very simple tool to wipe lines out and see what effect it has on your revenue, income, your VAT liability. And also I keep in that same spreadsheet my gross wages as well. so that my key KPI in that sheet is to look at what my gross wages to gross income or gross invoices looks like, that ratio. And when that ratio starts to dip, I've got little cells that will go red and say, right, you need to earn more money in that month to make yourself break even or make a profit rather than break even. It's not quite that dramatic, that spreadsheet.
What I find with business owners is they start with their own bookkeeping with the best intentions, and then you find that really a lot of them don't really understand it, particularly as their business grows and things get more complex or complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And then the forward-looking bit barely happens other than in their minds. How have you managed to do all of that? Are you self-taught? Is your mind just work in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not mathematically minded. I did do maths A level. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my education career. I did pure and stats. I quite like the pure. It's poetry. The stats bored the hell out of me. But stats is what you end up doing on a day-to-day basis as a small business. So, yeah, I guess my mind does work that way, but I feel very responsible for my employees. And again, I suppose another COVID teaching is that there's a point at which you tip over where you can no longer afford your employee. And I find that's quite a burden. That's a heavy cross to bear. And so I wanted to be sure in myself that I could always afford the people that I take on. So I don't hire stacks and stacks of employees when it feels like it might be a boom time. I look at the forward sustainability based on what's projected forwards as well. So for me, that the natural answer to that is lay it all out in some form of, I don't know, some spreadsheet so you can do the calculations and see whether you can afford that wages bill, even if you take out this, and this client, or if this project is a visiting guest, it's a large amount of money that comes for a little while. How does that make your financial year look on balance?
So we've got a business owner. They're doing well. They're bringing in loads of revenue. They're not maybe seeing as much profit. And this is maybe resonating with them that actually I'm relying on a whale, or, this could turn on me. I can understand Debbie's story and I want to stop this before it happens. What would be the 5 steps to going from a blank spreadsheet to the level of financial maturity that you've got at the moment?
Put all your current financial year into just lines on a spreadsheet. Make it into a sales ledger. Who have you got coming in, revenue-wise? Keep in mind, are they a good payer? Because, if they pay in 30 days, happy days. But also if you start to have a lag on that cash flow, they can also become a risk to you. But put all your income in one part of your spreadsheet. And then what are your major expenditures? So what rents do you have to pay? What are the things you can't avoid paying? Which also, your staff is probably going to be your biggest cost. But then also if you've got buildings or you've got a large rental or a retail space, that'll be a big cost. And if you look at that gross to gross, you can get a very rough calculation of what your cost of doing business is and what your gross profit might look like. Because then you've got to be wiping off all your liabilities as an employer. So you've got to be doing national insurance and pensions and all the things that go to HMRC for having an employee in place. But then you've also got to look at roughly what your corporation tax band might look like. So it's 19-20% for most small businesses. So you just wipe that straight off. Can you afford to still be in business if you take just 20% straight off? Because that is going to go to the government. You're just babysitting that money. So I'd build from there and then look at your whales. So again, in my fantastic spreadsheet, I have a percentage of contribution that I calculate. So I've got the 12 months and I've got a little percentage at the end that calculates all of that income and what percentage of total revenue do they contribute. Because it's lovely to see someone at 18 or 20% of your income, but they become your risk if they disappear. So they're great while they're visiting, but when they disappear, that leaves, 18, 19, 20% hole in your income. And you've got to then replace that, which is not so easy. I don't know if that's 5 steps.
It was great, though, whether it was or it wasn't. how have you managed to keep up the discipline? Because something that I know myself and from speaking with Phil and other business owners, time and having time to do things, particularly, we all go into businesses that we enjoy because we like doing those skills are our strengths and we enjoy doing those things usually. Phil always talks about being an engineer. I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So doing the things that are not our discipline. So I always say I hate marketing, absolutely hate it. How have you managed to keep that discipline going and keep yourself on that track? What's been behind that? Because that's something that people do struggle with.
Yeah, well, I guess I do the bookkeeping, but I don't do any of that hard accountancy stuff. That's what my accountant does. And I don't even pretend to understand all the new rules and regulations as they come in. That's what I pay them for. And they do a good job of advising me on that front. So I don't mind bookkeeping, actually, because it drives me to know whether, I suppose as a small business owner, what I don't want to do is go out of business. So that's probably the driver for me wanting to maintain discipline on good bookkeeping. But also, if you get receipts in, I process them every week. I don't put them all in a big box and do them when the VAT return's required. So by the time the VAT return is coming round, I know that all the numbers are still in there, and I've spent time in Xero allocating them to the correct cost centre, so that I can just hit the button. It's like VAT return required, hit the button, because I know that I've done that granular legwork at the time. And so, that is me trying to avoid effort down the line, because there's nothing worse than sitting with a pile of receipts and trying to, you're looking at a random receipt that might not have its business name on it. And you're like, well, what was that for? What was I doing on that date? And trying to reconcile that in order to just do something like a VAT return. That's time you need to not waste. Whereas if you just do that as part of your morning routine, like every Monday morning, you go, right, where's my receipts? I'll reconcile my accounts today. Then you free up time, in actual fact, just by doing...
Yeah.
I think the adage is look after the pennies and the pounds will take care of themselves.
Yeah, it's true. I talk about Finance Fridays, which is the same concept, just time in your diary every week. Doesn't have to be Friday, and just get it done. And what's really interesting about what you just said, Debbie, is that I agree with you in one way, that the challenging bit or the difficult bit or the technical bit, the accountants bring to the table, as they quite rightly should. But the fundamental bit of most businesses and why most businesses don't succeed, or why they don't understand what's going on in their numbers, or they don't understand what's going on in their business, is because they don't do the bit that you're doing. And that bit is massively underestimated, I think.
Yes.
So it's just really interesting that you've managed to do that. And
I guess I've seen
get
people,
to the point.
Yeah. I guess I've seen people like peers or in this sort of local space where they just go under very suddenly. And sometimes it can be because there'll be a dispute on an invoice, or somebody disagrees with the quality of work, or there's an unexpected wage or VAT bill. I mean, I don't think you should ever be surprised by your VAT bill. I don't think you should really ever be surprised by your corporation tax bill. You get that up to a year after the year has already ended because of the deadlines for filing. So, you shouldn't then come to your corporation tax bill and go, oh my God, I've got to find tens of thousands of pounds. You should already have that set away. And when I take clients on, one of my first questions is, are you profitable? I am surprised when they say, well, we're going to go and see our accountant today, so we'll find out. That's definitely not what your behaviour pattern should be. Your accountant should not be telling you whether you're profitable or not after the fact, because your financial year is already gone. It's months gone. You shouldn't know. You shouldn't be discovering for the first time whether your last financial year that was months ago was in profit or not.
Yeah, I totally agree. I wish that more business owners could see that and were, on board with the journey, I suppose. I just have one more question before we start to wrap up, and it's just going back to something you talked about at the beginning about how when you started Destination Digital, you wanted to make it best practice about everything, and that over time you saw the results of that coming through. Could you just share a little bit about that? Because I think potentially quite an interesting concept, because what happens very often is that you put in all the effort in up front, but you don't see the results because a lot of things are longer burn. And again, it'd just be interesting to understand how you kept up the motivation and kept going and really in the process, I suppose.
Okay, yeah. I suppose, I mean, I've already used one old adage of, take care of the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves. But I guess also something that's always been a principle of mine is never a borrower or a lender be. So I don't spend what I don't have. So I don't put things on finance. If I haven't got it, I cut my cloth to fit that. I think there's a lot of people that I do work with, some, quite large clients, and they do a lot of very fancy financing things, raising money off this to grow that. And that's great, because that's perfectly legitimate growth tactics. But, I worked with one client and they were on a long burn. They were looking for a 10-year turnaround on their investment. They were millions of pounds in debt because they had to raise such a lot of finance to get that business going. Their investors were on board with that, and it was a fascinating journey to be on. But I remember saying to him at the time, I don't know how you can sleep at night knowing that you owe 10, 15 million to other people and you're not going to get a return for 10 years. I just don't know how that doesn't suit me. So I would not be a good business owner of that type of business, and I probably wouldn't be a good business leader of a very large corporation such as some of the clients we work with, because that is just next level. But in terms of small and medium-sized business, the way I operate, I would say is a best practice for quite a lot of people starting out, and don't go heavily financing things if you can't afford it, because if you can't afford it now, you probably can't afford it when you're also saddled with debt.
I think we've got some phenomenal takeaways from you there, Debbie. The things that I kind of picked up and really resonated with me are, first, every business owner should know their overheads. So before you wake up in the morning, so to speak, you should know how much your rent is and how much your electric, how much your cost of goods sold, your things that you have to have. And I'd add on there, remember to put in your own salary. Because if we're not making money, and it might not even be the salary you're earning today, put in the salary you want to earn. Because if you're trying to then base your prices off that initial spreadsheet, you want the salary that you deserve rather than the salary that you don't want. And then I also love that you went through all of your customers and you looked at what margin they each were compared to your business. And you worked out, as we call it, the whales and the tails, who are the big customers that actually might turn into being my boss if they take up too much of my income, and how much of the little customers that are kind of plodding along with me but are maybe not so profitable. Then you took all that and you've kept going with it, and you've done a forecasting. And I think for any small business, it might be a little bit aspirational, if I'm honest with you, to get to that, but it's an aspiration that we should definitely all have. For me personally, I use a bookkeeper to help me with that journey, because I also took A-level maths. However, I got very drunk and didn't pass it. So there's maybe a slight disparity between our two personality types there. And on that note, if somebody's really enjoyed listening to you today and they've said, you know what, because people buy people, I've loved listening to Debbie, I love the journey that she's on, and I think I'd like to get in touch with her. Who is your ideal client and how can they get in touch with you?
Most of our clients are turning over 500,000 or more, and that's where we aim for, although we do look after smaller businesses as well. We do have a number of those on our portfolio. But yeah, getting in touch, we've obviously got the website, destination-digital.co.uk, and you can then have a look at some of the clients we've worked with and some of the things we get up to, because best practice-wise, we keep our marketing up to date. And you can also find us on socials. And I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, ideal client-wise, somebody who's got high growth aspirations and maybe is getting to that tipping point of they've got enough income that's assured, it's regular, to be able to afford to outsource to somebody like us, but maybe they haven't quite got enough regular income to fund actually taking on an employee, because that could be quite an expensive cost for them. And so, we often will interim manage whole marketing departments, with one client, but any form of help to get to the next level. Because what you know for sure, my first question is, are you profitable? And I will want you to answer that question because it helps me judge whether you're going to be a profitable client for me as well. Because we're not running your business for you, we're just doing your marketing.
Thank you so much for joining us, Debbie.
Thank you for inviting.
So Phil, Debbie was an incredible guest. What was your big takeaway?
I think the way that Debbie processed things in a real solid and pragmatic way. I think Debbie really moved through not just taking over the bookkeeping in her business, but she drew a line in the sand and said, I need to understand everything to understand anything. And she then went through all customers, all costs as well, and worked out, okay, how profitable is each customer based on my costs, based on my overheads, based on the amount of work we put in, but also how reliant am I on each customer? Because I think as small businesses, we often rely on those whales to keep us going. And if we don't know that, that's a huge risk to us. How about yourself, Hayley?
The big takeaway for me was how Debbie feels like what she's doing is surviving. She's like in survival mode. I need to understand this and I need to know all these things. I've got my bookkeeping in place. I've got my spreadsheet in place, which we've just said. Debbie doesn't think it's complicated, but it sounds very complicated. And what's incredible is she almost doesn't realise that a lot of clients and businesses that we deal with, that's the bit that they're missing. That's the bit that they don't have. That's the bit that a lot of accountancy practices don't really support people with. And that's the bit that really makes the difference between, or can make the difference between, a business that's really successful and knows where it's going and knows where its downfalls are or shortfalls might be, versus a business that actually is aware of all that and can navigate around it and actually meet with those curveballs as they come because they've got that foresight and that knowledge already at their fingertips. I thought it was quite incredible that Debbie does that, and she's just like, I just have to do it for me. It's not anything wonderful that I'm doing. It's not complicated. It's just so I know where I am.
I think for me, that might be the only piece that I slightly push back on. That I think the opportunity to outsource it, yet still keep that high level control, is something that I would have as a preference for myself. I think Debbie's got a real natural flair for it and she enjoys doing that kind of work. And I think what's happened to Debbie is she's genuinely changed from being an engineer to becoming a business owner and looking on those things as a complete top level, which is something that I think we all need to do. She's bracing prices and costs on facts, not on finger in the air maths. And I love the way that she's then gone into forecasting. I think it's something that we do within my business, but it's not something that I want as the business owner to have as a core function to filling that out. But I can certainly understand where Debbie's coming from and the benefit to her. Is it something that you would recommend for a business owner to be doing themselves or to outsource or somewhere in the middle, Hayley?
That's a great question, Phil. I think the answer is it depends. I think there are lots of different instances. So you might have somebody that's very numbers minded, they get it, they understand it, they enjoy doing it, probably a bit like Debbie, and they can meet those requirements and do a good job because they understand it, they like it and they get it. And the important thing that Debbie does is she does it consistently, whereas a lot of business owners won't have the patience or the discipline, let's say, to do that. I think the other thing that comes into it then is where you want to take your business and how much you want to grow. Because if you're quite ambitious and you want to hit high revenues, a bigger team, you're quite ambitious, I think there does become a point where you being the business owner and doing those tasks those two things don't marry up. So I think the answer is it just depends on kind of which bucket you fall into. And also the other end of the scale is you get businesses that don't, they're happy being relatively whatever size they are comfortable with. But actually the person running those businesses they don't have a clue about numbers, they don't like doing it, they don't have the discipline, so they don't do it. And they're exactly the people that just get everything in a muddle, or they leave it, like again, we touched on this in the episode, they leave it till the last minute. They don't know where they're up to. They never know if they're making profit. They can't make the right decisions. Or worse still, they try to do it themselves and it just ends up in a muddle, and then they end up having to pay somebody to sort it out anyway.
I think, as with most things in business, that it's a risk. And so, as Debbie really eloquently highlighted, having whales, having costs that you've not expected, these are all risks. And if you're aware of that risk, you can choose, well, I'm going to pay a bookkeeper to mitigate it. I'm going to bring an accountant to mitigate. I'm going to bring an admin member. I'm going to do it myself to do the mitigate. Or you accept the risk and say, I'm going to accept that risk and we're going to keep going because, do you know what? We are cash flow positive. We've always got a lot of money in the bank. We can ride over this as long as I keep selling. And I suppose that's the two kind of perspectives on it, but it's knowing that there is a risk and then what your mitigation is. And I think for Debbie, her mitigation is that she does the bookkeeping. She keeps a thin or a close eye on that. And I could imagine her on Dragon's Den or a similar program because she's got that eye on it. I can imagine her saying to small business owners, I can keep an eye on my figures. Why can't you?
The downside to it, of course, is if you're doing it all and you're the one person that knows, that's a lot of reliance on you. If something happens to you, hopefully, being a bit negative Nancy here, but if you, for whatever reason, then get taken out of the business or out of action for a while, everything tumbles down because it's just reliant on one person, which is a risk on any process within a business, isn't it? Let's be truthful, it's not just about finances. But I just thought it was really interesting that she was so on everything and seemed to just be taking it in her stride when actually what she's doing is quite incredible.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And thank you everyone so much for joining us. We hope you found one thing to help move your business forward.
And if you did, do us a favour, please share this episode with someone else who's on the same journey, and we'll see you next time on What One Thing.